For decades, Dungeons & Dragons players have asked the question, should my character use a great axe or a great sword? Many players understand intuitively that the great axe presents a larger possibility for disaster. The unwieldy axe will strike a glancing blow for only 1 or 2 points of damage far more often than the trusty sword. But those players wonder if the axe's ability to score big 12 damage blowout hits with some regularity might be worth the risk. Every answer I've seen to this question fits in one of two forms. Some answers are technical. Helpful commentators will point out that the average damage of the great sword is higher than the average damage of the great axe. And unless some other feat or ability is at play, the sword is probably the better choice. Other answers try to steer us away from the question entirely. Concerned role players point out that the practical difference between the two weapons is tiny, and that players would be better off considering their character's aesthetics when deciding which weapon to wield. Both of these answers are correct. Both are incomplete. As I hope to show in this video series, a proper investigation of the damage profile of these two weapons can inform decisions about what is optimal and what is flavorful. The Greataxe is a heavy, two-handed melee weapon that deals a base 1d12 points of slashing damage. Before we even talk about swords, I'd like to compare the Greataxe to a different weapon, this one hypothetical. Let's talk about a Great Scalpel. This is also a heavy, two-handed slashing melee weapon, but one that does a fixed 6.5 points of damage every time it hits. Would you rather wield a great axe or a great scalpel? In order to compare the two weapons, we are going to run a number of simulations. Here in Scratch, I can build sprites to represent game characters and automate them as they play through various tests. In this first test, two characters face off against each other. Each makes a single attack each turn, dealing either 1d12 damage for the axe or 6.5 damage for the scalpel. As we repeat this test over and over and over again, you can see that it's a wash. The two characters are perfectly evenly matched. The axe wins half the battles, and the scalpel wins half the battles. In this test, the two characters face off against a wall with 650 HP. Who will break through first? The scalpel always requires exactly 100 hits to break through, since it's dealing a fixed 1% damage with each hit. The axe gets through faster half the time when it's rolling relatively well, and slower the other half when rolling relatively poorly. Again, the competition is pointless. The two weapons are completely evenly matched. So this is what commentators mean when they say the average damage dealt by the Great Axe is 6.5. In long-run competitions, the axe does no better and no worse than a weapon like the scalpel, which deals a flat 6.5 points of damage. But this obviously isn't the whole story. In this next test, our characters face off against a horde of monsters, each with 7 HP. The characters get 1,000 attacks to dispatch as many of the monsters as possible. In this challenge, the axe clearly has the advantage, killing at least 100 more mobs than the scalpel every single time. But let's drop the enemy's HP by a single point, down to 6. Now the tables have turned entirely. The scalpel is killing at least 300 more enemies than the axe in each encounter. So in spite of the fact that the two weapons deal the same average damage, their different damage profiles can be critically important. The scalpel always kills a 6 HP enemy in one hit. The axe sometimes takes 2 or even 3 hits. The scalpel always kills a 7 HP enemy in 2 hits, but the axe can often get it done in 1. Here, we've graphed the relative performance of axe and scalpel against enemies with HPs from 1 through 13. Let's do one last test. Here, a party of 2 heroes comes up against a gang of 4 enemies. The enemies range in HP from 6 points to 9 points. The players go first, attacking and dealing their damage. And then the living mobs strike back, dealing 5 damage each. We allow our heroes to take a total 10,000 points of damage, and look to see how many waves of enemies they can overcome before they fall. We can compare parties of 2 axes, 2 scalpels, and 1 of each, and find they're fairly evenly matched, overcoming between 300 and 400 waves. This shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, as we know that individual axes and scalpels perform about evenly against enemies across this HP range. Right now, our party members are pretty dumb. They just attack down the line, hitting enemy 1 until it's dead, and then moving on to enemy 2, and then enemy 3, and so on. I'm going to give my Axeman a little more tactical intelligence. I'm going to reprogram him to ignore an enemy whose HP has dropped below 7. I'll smarten up my Scalpel Wielder as well, and tell her to priority attack an enemy whose HP is less than 7. If 2 enemies both have HP less than 7, she'll attack the one with the highest current HP. In terms of their stats, this party isn't any stronger than parties we tested previously. It's still 2 characters who deal 6.5 damage on average. However, by thinking tactically about different damage profiles, we made our warriors dramatically more effective. As this example shows, an appropriate tactical use of a Greataxe is to ferociously chase down fresh enemies with larger HP pools, leaving weakened monsters for the more sure-handed party members to polish off. It's important for tacticians and optimizers to know this when forming a battle plan, but I think it's equally important for aestheticians trying to match a weapon to their character. The Greataxe doesn't just sound like the weapon of a wild, thrill-seeking barbarian. It actually plays that way, which is awesome, and the kind of thing I think the game designers deserve recognition for. This brings us to the end of part 1. We've got a handle on the Greataxe, but before we can move on to the Great Sword, we need a bit of an interlude. In the next video, I'm going to compare a mage casting Magic Missile to deal 3d4 plus 3 damage, and a knight wielding a longsword to deal 1d10 plus 5 damage. If you want to keep thinking about tactics, go back and review the instructions that I gave the intelligent axe and scalpel. By adding another caveat to their battle plan, I could have made the party even more effective. We'll explore that element in next week's video. Thanks so much for watching.